I'm a recovering addict and I have used a wide variety of drugs. But for me, as a person with schizoaffective disorder, absolutely the most dangerous drug I have ever tried is marijuana. I started using marijuana when I was about 17 years old, and it wasn't long after I started using it regularly that I went into my first psychotic episode. And of course, I knew nothing about psychosis at the time, and I was the only person that thought I had psychosis because everyone just thought that I was, like too aware of my symptoms to really have it. So I didn't get the treatment I deserved, and I didn't have anyone telling me, using hallucinogenic drugs can actually put you in psychosis. So I continued using marijuana, and I would have like phases of sobriety where I'd be sober for about a year and then I would relapse, and pretty much every time that I relapsed, I would end up going psychotic. And sometimes it would take a long time to get to that point, but sometimes it was practically immediate, where the slightest amount of marijuana I put in my system sent me into a psychotic episode. By then, I'd had multiple hospitalizations for multiple psychotic episodes. I was properly diagnosed, and I was eventually told by probably more than one doctor that marijuana was dangerous to me and I was only going to get worse if I kept using it. But the thing about addiction is that addiction doesn't care about your well-being. Addiction doesn't care about your health. Addiction doesn't care that you're throwing your life away. It will just keep eating away at you until you have nothing left. And that ultimately happened to me as a result of going into psychosis from smoking way too much weed. I actually ended up homeless. I ended up in an abusive relationship with a predatory man. I couldn't defend myself against that in that state, and it was a nightmare. Now, a lot of people have tried to tell me that my psychosis is not schizoaffective disorder, it is drug-induced, because there is drug-induced psychosis that happens commonly with meth users. But for me, the psychosis doesn't go away when I sober up. It'll keep going and going and going. It's just like a trigger. It's like going off of my meds or being on the wrong meds. A lot of things can put me into psychosis, and that's just one of them. What ultimately got me sober this time around was just really accepting for the first time that if I smoked marijuana, I would go psychotic, because I had never really accepted it before and I kept trying and failing. And I thought that if I used just a small amount, I wouldn't go psychotic. It turns out any amount will do that to me, because only taking a couple of puffs off a joint every 2 or 3 days still put me into psychosis. I thankfully have a fiance who at the time was able to recognize what was happening. I had to have 3 hospitalizations over the course of a year before I came out of that episode. So some people's bottoms are different than others. Mine was caused by marijuana, and to me, it's the most dangerous drug I have ever tried. I have now been sober a little over 3 years. This is the longest I've ever been sober, and honestly, a large part of what keeps me sober is just never, ever wanting to go back to that place. No, never. So yeah, I've tried other drugs. I've tried some scarier drugs. I've tried some more fun drugs, but this is the one that broke me. So I just think if people could appreciate a little more that this is actually a serious addiction and it can have pretty terrible consequences, maybe there'd be a little less of a stigma around marijuana addicts. I'm gonna break my anonymity here for a second, but to be honest, I think it's been pretty clear from a few of my other videos that I am sober. I am sober. I'm in 12-step programs. I'm in multiple 12-step programs. I'm in Al-Anon, Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is where I met my partner, and I was honestly kind of like a little pissed at this guy. I'd seen him coming around before. I had been going to the same meetings as him for a while, and I thought he seemed like a pretty solid guy, but I wasn't interested in dating anyone in the program. I kind of always had this rule that I was never going to date anyone in the program. However, he came in late to a meeting once, like really late, like 20 minutes before the end of the meeting, which I typically think is really rude, and I don't like being late personally. He immediately shared without knowing what the topic was, went on a spiel, but it was a good share. I remember thinking like, this fucking guy, but it was a good share. So I came up to him after the meeting and I told him I liked his share. And like an hour later, I got a message from him on Facebook and we just started talking. And I thought, yeah, this guy just wants to get in my pants. But we ended up becoming friends and I made it pretty clear that I didn't want to date him. And we just, from there, hung out every day, talked every day. I guess it became pretty clear that like I liked him. I didn't realize I liked him. And it sort of evolved until we just naturally started dating and just got to that point where it eased into a relationship, and it's been awesome. We've been together 3.5 years. We're engaged. We're planning on getting a service dog for me soon, so we'll have another member of the family. Yeah, I love him with all my heart. I've never had a relationship like this, and it's been amazing. Sometimes the hardest part about getting sober is staying sober long enough to watch your closest friends go back out in a relapse and never come back. It really astonishes me that people I really looked up to, that I had seen become so successful and get their lives back and have significantly more time than me, just lost it all and could never get it back together. One of the hardest ones for me was a friend of mine who had over 9 years sober when he relapsed, and I think I had less than a year at the time, and I had struggled to get in and out and in and out. And this guy that I thought was solid, bomb-proof, was never going to go back out because he had made it. He hasn't kept it together. It's been a few years now, and he has been in and out, and I'm pretty sure he's back out, and I just want my friend back. At the end of the day, that's what hurts the most. I just want my friends back. Like, I miss them, and I want to hang out together, and I want them to be healthy, and I want them to be okay. I have one friend right now who can't get more than 90 days, and she's been in that state for over a year. And I'm so happy to see her at meetings, but I just want her to stop. And not because like it necessarily angers me that she can't get it together, but because I want her to have the good life that she had before. And it's hard to see someone go from that to completely losing everything. And what scares me the most isn't just that I'm losing my friends to relapse, it's that the longer they stay out there using, the more realistic it becomes that they might overdose and die. And I have lost a few friends to overdose already. And there's some really scary shit going around right now. I don't think I have to say it out loud, but there's a drug out there that is just so fucking dangerous, taking lives left and right, absolutely destroying the community. And, you know, I don't want it to be my friends. I hope it won't be my friends. But if it is my friends, I'm going to go to their funeral because that's what I've done before. I saw a comment here on TikTok once that said, an addict's life is always worth saving, whether they ever get sober or not. And I completely agree with that, because there are people I know who have been Narcaned like 10 or more times that have long-term recovery now. And I know that even if people go in and out, they do have periods of, you know, having a valuable life, and they deserve that. They deserve any window of amount of time of sobriety they can keep. So yeah, I don't like the notion that addicts don't deserve life too, and that you shouldn't help them, because when they're well, they're really well, and when they're sick, and they need to be seen as a sick person because it's a disease. Can you talk more about your experience with marijuana and how it obliterated your mind? Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a recovering addict, and I'm not a hardcore IV drug user. I'm a pothead. And a lot of people don't seem to get that you can be an addict and your drug of choice can be marijuana. You're still a valid addict. I've seen a lot of times people react with laughter or mocking when I tell them that I'm a pothead addict, like that's my drug of choice, because they don't understand that you can go to the same lengths as a hardcore IV drug user. I've been homeless because of my addiction. I've lost my mind literally because of my addiction. And no amount of telling myself that I was using marijuana medicinally would actually help me, because in the end, I was really only making my mental state worse. I would tell myself, okay, so I know that using marijuana will send me into psychosis, but what if I only used a little bit? What if I just used a small enough amount that didn't happen, and I can stop anytime I want to? I can't stop anytime I want to. I've tried so fucking hard. The only thing that keeps me stopped is going to my meetings and having a sponsor, because without the help, without outside help, I can't do it by myself. And at the beginning, when I relapsed from marijuana and was still stable and not psychotic, I said, I'll just smoke like a couple hits off of a joint every once or twice a week. And I did that. And I did that for a few months actually. But even that small of an amount is enough to send me into psychosis. So I did send myself into psychosis. Two or three of my episodes were related to marijuana. It wasn't entirely what caused the episodes, but I think with that last one, that's all it took, was the marijuana. And there's no safe amount that I can use. And even if there were, I wouldn't use it safely because of the nature of my addiction. So I am a walking telltale sign of why marijuana can be dangerous and why it should be respected and used properly, because it can absolutely wreck your life. But that's just me. Then when it got to the point where I could feel the prodromal phase coming on, I couldn't stop, and I knew I was going psychotic, and I was still smoking those joints. I can't even begin to explain what would cause a person to do something like that. What would cause someone to say, hey, you know what's a fate worse than death? Psychosis. Do you want to know what I want to risk? Doing that. There's no describing like why an addict does the things they do. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it, right? A lot of addicts end up homeless. They end up with abscesses, health problems. They die. And it's not a choice at that point, honestly. I can't stress that enough, that it reaches a point where the choice is taken from you by the substance, and you essentially have this insane compulsion within you that you can't fight. It's so far beyond just having a recreational drug habit at that point. Today I have 4 years sober, and let me tell you, it hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows and kittens. These have been some of the worst years of my life. And I'm not saying that to discourage you. If anything, I'm saying that to encourage you. See, this isn't my first go around with sobriety. I think it's my fourth. And all the other times that I had tried to get sober, I could get about a year and then I would relapse. Usually that 1 year that I would be sober would be the best time of my life, and my life would come together, and I'd get a job, and I'd get housing, I'd get a fun relationship with some cute guy, and it seemed like everything in my life was coming together, when in fact I was setting myself up for failure. You see, I had it easy, and when things are going easy in recovery, you're not exactly learning how to live life on life's terms. So when things would inevitably get hard, because that's life, I didn't have the tools to deal with it. I didn't know how to handle hard things sober, because all I'd ever handled sober was the good stuff. And this time around, that wasn't the case. My life sucked right from the start. This time around, things were a lot harder, because within my first 30 days being sober, one of my friends died. And then my grandpa died, my dog died, there was a freaking pandemic. I was psychotic the first 8 months. I was SA'd. I wanted to myself. I was self-harming. It was one of the worst years of my life. But I got through it sober, and I continued to get through hard stuff sober over and over and over again. The first 3 years, I would say, were some of the worst years of my life, but I got through it because I learned right at the beginning how to handle this stuff, how to do things sober that I otherwise would have relapsed over. I learned that it's possible to get through anything sober. I learned how to use tools to get through life and to manage life without relapsing, which I had never done before. And I learned that life doesn't get better, I get better. Life stays on like it is. Life is life, but I get better. I rise to the occasion. I learn how to live life, and I learn how to take care of myself. What I thought was being cursed turned out to be the greatest blessing in my life, because every other time I'd gotten sober, everything was perfect and my life came together, and that didn't do me any favors because I didn't learn how to get through life. This time around, everything sucking and shit hitting the fan right off the bat was exactly what I needed. So yeah, it's possible to get through anything sober, and it can actually be a good thing. I don't think I'd be sober today if it had been easy. I don't think I could have done it without this being such a torturous, awful experience. Now I have a great life and I'm happy. I'm consistently happy every day. And I feel like I earned that because I worked so freaking hard to get here. And it wasn't easy. Like I said, it was pretty rough. But putting in the work made it so worthwhile that now when things come up today, it's water off the duck's back. It's so much easier to handle because I learned how to do that. I learned how to live sober. If you're struggling to stay sober or to get sober and life is hitting you from all sides, I'd encourage you to take it as an opportunity to learn how to live life on life's terms. Don't let it be a reason to take you out and relapse. Anything can be a reason to relapse, but let this be a reason to motivate you to stay sober and to climb that mountain and get to the top and say, I did it, and I did it sober.
I know everyone is different, but I'm interested to know which tools you found to be most useful to you during that period. So that's in regards to this other video I made where I talked about how hard my time in early sobriety was because I was going through a lot of grief and depression and psychosis, and I had to learn tools right away to cope with life because mine was unmanageable. There are a lot of different ways to find sobriety, I guess I would say, to recover. And not everyone goes through the 12 steps, but that's what worked for me. I know in my area, we have other programs. We have Celebrate Recovery. We have a Buddhist program called Refuge Recovery, I believe. I also know people who have turned to religion when they've gotten sober, and that's worked for them. Some people do self-help meditation, stuff like that. So there are a lot of avenues to go, and I'm just sharing about my experience, which is by no means the only way to go. Now, I'm the kind of person that thrives on community and structure, which is why 12-step programs work so well for me, because I need to have a community of people. So I think by far the most important tool for me was just reaching out, because I had never been the kind of person to ask for help. And when I struggle, I tend to isolate and shut in on myself. So learning to reach out to people and be honest about how I was doing was hard but necessary, because I always just tried to downplay how I was doing or act as if everything was fine because I didn't want people to know I was struggling. This especially came in handy when my grandpa died, because at the time I had this sponsor who had had a near-death experience in a motorcycle accident, and going through the grief process with her, who had an intimate relationship with death, helped a lot. So that was huge in helping me through that. And also being around people who had had the same experiences as me, who had grieved loss in recovery, who had struggled in the beginning, helped me a lot. I also took on a lot of responsibilities, and that helped a lot. I took on responsibilities like chairing meetings. There was a meeting I chaired every day for 3 months, and it was a noon meeting at the park during the pandemic. So I was in charge of facilitating that meeting. I also took on service positions, and I served as a secretary in my home group, and I organized activities, things like that. And there was this really cool one that my sponsor taught me called Pause, Pray, Proceed, which you can use when you're facing a difficult situation. Now, prayer is not for everyone. Spirituality and religion are not for everyone. For me, I really struggled with that for the first 3.5 years, and I didn't have any spirituality at all. But I found that if I prayed, even if I didn't have anything I was praying to, just pausing and taking the moment to think something out in my head until I felt clear-headed again, was enough. It was a start. It was not necessarily a spiritual practice then, but it was something that helped me because it allowed me to stop in the moment and assess my situation and continue. So those were some big ones for me. There were other smaller things, things like setting a daily routine. For instance, I didn't take care of my hygiene at all before I got sober. So just getting in the habit of brushing my teeth every day, that actually was a huge step forward for me because I had never been capable of doing that for myself. Things like eating every day, little things that you wouldn't think were that big of a deal unless you've chronically neglected them. So those were some of my tools in the very beginning, and that's what got me through my first year or two in early sobriety, and they're actually tools I continue to use today.